we're going to go ahead and get started, I guess. I'm going to ask Kurt if you would say a prayer first to kick us off.
Let's pray. Our kind and gracious Heavenly Father, we are grateful for allowing us to come together to worship Thee, especially, Father, in a country where we're unbridled by government authorities and so forth. We can worship You in truth and spirit. There are many of our number who are sick and ill, recovering. We ask that You watch over them and those who are still grieving the loss of loved ones, Father. Continue to be with them and comfort them in this time. As we labor here, may You give us strength and guidance as we go into the communities and teach others and preach the word, stand for the truth. Be with our elders as we move forward, Father. Watch over us all. May we all do our part in this community through the work. We ask all these things in Christ's name. Amen.
Appreciate it. We'll go ahead and get started. Rob said you guys got up through in the verse 20 in chapter 16, so I kind of want to recap a little bit on chapter 16 just to make sure we get caught up for what we're talking about today. For the rest of 16 and going into 17. In the beginning of chapter 16, verse 1, it talks about the Pharisees are looking for a sign. It's a time where Jesus kind of goes back to them and says, you guys are supposed to be spiritual leaders and teachers, but you're completely blind. You're not seeing what I'm here for. You're not seeing the fulfillment of the old law. You're not seeing who I am as the sign that you're looking for. I'm it. He says, I'll give you a sign. Jonah, that's your sign. They should have learned from that, but didn't. Then beginning in verse 5, it's a section that your Bible probably has it titled 11 of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. What was that 11 that we'll talk about in those passages? What do you guys remember from that? Doctrine, influence. Yeah. He warns his disciples to be on the lookout. Listen to what you're look for the truth. Don't listen to what they do and their influence that they have, and their spiritual perspective is skewed. It's not right. Then he gets into verse 13. From the teaching that Jesus has done to this point, what we get this section that we call Peter's confession. What is Peter confessing to him?
He is the Christ.
He is the Christ. Right? So Peter, kind of the sign that Jesus said, Peter gets it. All the ones that could get it, Peter got it. And he has that confession for him, which is, I've said before, I'll say it again, Peter kind of represents us in a lot of ways. His good, his ups and downs, his good, his bad, his flaws and everything else. So he kind of represents us, but at this particular point, Peter gets it. He confesses that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. There in verse 16. And then verse 18, it says, I say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I'll build my church, and its gates shall not prevail against it. What was that rock that he's talking about?
Foundation of Christ.
Foundation of Christ, yeah. What? Anything else? His faith, that faith that he had. That's the foundation. Like I said, Peter at this point was the one that got it. And then we start seeing a change here coming up in verse 21. At the end of verse 20, it's very interesting that he says, then he commanded his disciples that they should tell no one that he was Jesus the Christ. So again, we get the warning that keep this hush hush. Don't. It's not time to spread the word on that yet. Let's keep it all under wraps. Was there any questions on that section through verse 20? You guys talked about last week. I don't want to go too far into it again, but is there any questions on anything that y'all discussed?
We didn't go too far into it either.
Okay. Beginning of verse 21, this is really the first prediction of Jesus' death. So keep in mind, somebody read verses 21 to 23 for me real quick.
From that time Jesus began to show to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and be raised the third day. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, Far be it from you, Lord, this shall not happen to you. But he turned and said to Peter, Get behind me, Satan. You are a offense to me, for you are not mindful of the things of God, but the things of men.
Appreciate that. Okay, so Peter, like I said, represents us in a lot of ways, but Peter is he's kind of known for being that guy with the really big heart that will act and talk first and then think second. And we've seen that all throughout Scripture. But he just came off of this conversation with Christ, where he gets told, he confessed to Jesus that you are the Christ, Son of the living God. Jesus kind of praises him and says, for your faith, I'm going to build my church on that kind of faith. And then Jesus tells them, tells all the disciples that, listen, soon I'm going to be going to Jerusalem, I'm going to be going to suffer many things, the elders and the chief priests and scribes. I'm going to be killed. That's kind of hard news for anybody to tell their friends. But imagine being Peter. Put yourself in Peter's shoes and try to understand from Peter's perspective what he's hearing from Jesus, the one who just told him, I'm going to build this church, and he says, right after that, I'm going to die, I'm going to be killed. What does Peter think about that? He has a natural reaction, I think, that we all probably would have. But he's thinking on an earthly level. Where's Peter getting messed up here?
You must wonder if Peter hears the part that I'm going to be raised up on the third day. Because then that would have said, what? What does that mean? Right? It's almost like he honed in on, oh, by the way, yeah, I'm going to be killed, which would go against everything. If there's supposed to be a king, then he's supposed to be the king, right? So that whole third day thing, we're reading it. Did Peter really receive and understand that? Because that probably would have thought, right, hindsight on this one, that would have made him say, what? What in the world does that mean? But you don't see any of that dialogue.
No, what you see is from a human perspective, Peter sees his friend's I'm going to be killed. You don't hear that part, I'm going to be raised the third day, because that doesn't compute in our brains. I'm going to be raised. Okay, what does that even mean?
Well, nobody's done it.
Nobody's ever done it, so it's over his head. So he's thinking purely on an earthly level, you're going to be killed? That's why he rebukes him there in verse 22, saying, far be it from you, Lord, this shall not happen to you. And then he turns to him and says, get behind me, Satan. Why does he say, get behind me, Satan?
Because he knows what's going to happen. And that Peter's going to deny him 3 times.
Yeah, but why is he called Satan, though?
Not having belief.
Not having belief, part of it, yeah. I believe it's because he's going against the will of God. He's not thinking, he's not like, I'm deliberately trying to go against the will of God. He's thinking, I got to stop this happening. He's not thinking this is what Jesus is who he says he is. What Jesus says has got to go. Right? That's what's going to happen. Yes, ma'am.
Well, any experience on the water, to me, he experienced that with it, so he's thinking, well, he can do all things, I guess,
You think, yeah, Peter's all over the map with what he's experiencing and what he should be doing and what he's not doing. He's kind of always all over the place. But I think what the problem here is that Peter is really kind of thinking he needs to stop this, and that's going to be derailing what God wants to do. That's why he says, that's what Satan would do. That's why he calls him Satan, because he's acting like a Satan.
I don't think he understands Jesus' purpose.
No, he doesn't. Not completely. I don't think any of them do until way later, right? Yeah. Anybody got any comments on that? Questions on that?
This is interesting that Peter is rebuked here and told, that you're not setting your mind on the things of God, but yet he's still the one that draws the sword in the garden and cuts the servant of the high priest's ear off. He forgets. He's like, oh.
That was
I've got to protect him.
Yeah.
That was the whole thing.
That was an act first, think second kind of deal.
Yeah.
He wasn't trying to aim for that guy's ear. He wasn't an expert swordsman. He was aiming for the neck, trying to take that guy's head off. The guy's probably dug with his ear. You don't swear against a soldier and try to kill him, and then yeah. That was a very impetuous move on Peter's part. But yeah, that's his character throughout all Scripture.
His whole makeup is impetuous.
Mm-hmm.
Let's act and then think about it later.
Yep.
Which is part of why we can relate to him so well,
Exactly.
right? I mean, just look at his perspective, like you said. He witnessed and himself walked on water, right? So for Jesus to say he's going to be killed, to me, a couple thoughts go into his head. First of all, you walked on water, can't nobody kill you, is first one. Second one is, I'm not going to let that happen, right? Which is part of why he didn't hear the second part of what he said, because he's already thinking about it. Just like if you came to me and said, hey man, I'm going to be killed tomorrow, I'm like, whatever, dude, I got not happening, right? Regardless of what you said after that, I have no idea, because we're focused on that. And, and then it says specifically what he was focused on. He was focused on things of this world.
Yep.
The things that were easily understood by
And that's why Jesus goes into this next part here in verse 24, 27. It says, and Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. What profit is it to a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? For the Son of Man will come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and then he will reward each according to his works. We kind of take the situation that Peter's in right here, focusing on, not intentionally, but focusing on worldly things, and uses that to teach all the disciples, you guys got this backwards. It's about, that's kind of what Ryan's lesson was about this morning. About desires to save his life, will lose it. Whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. It's about taking that true perspective. I don't think any of us truly have, I'll be honest with you. I would pitch that as a statement there. That we don't all truly do this to the best of our ability. I don't think any of us do, myself included. We will all lose our life. That doesn't mean just necessarily just death. What does that mean? We talk about this in our men's class several times. That usually means Jesus put his life aside. He could have had anything that he wanted here on earth, any kind of earthly pleasure, money, whatever you wanted. He could have had it all, but he put his whole life aside, his desires, his needs, anything like that aside, to focus on being righteous and serving others and those kinds of things.
Yeah, we know we don't do it. That's what James says, right? Where do fights and wars come from? Your own desires, right? Think about it. We would never argue, fight, or treat each other bad if it wasn't for selfishness. There's no other way to boil that down, right? It is always an individual that's doing something wrong. We would forgive, we would let go, we don't do that because that's not who we are. We are not who we should be, we are who we are. Let me say it that way.
Absolutely. So how does this apply to me?
And I think Drew got a question.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, kind of back to 23, when he calls Peter, says, get behind me, Satan. He says, do not be a stumbling block to me. I think that's a very interesting statement of Jesus has to go through this. He knows he has to go through this, but despite that, he's still just a man. He came down here and he is just as easily succumbed to the temptations of, I don't want to die. Nobody in here wants to die. But he still struggles with that. And he has to go through with the horrific sacrificial death that he does for our sake. And his closest friends are telling him, no, we don't let you do that. We can't let you do that.
We're going to stop it.
Yeah, we're going to prevent this.
Yeah.
But Jesus has to be strong enough, not only for himself to accept the death, but even for his best friends that he relies on in a worldly sense. And to convince them that this is the right thing to do. Also, the phrasing stumbling block that's used in the New American Standard made me think of something else in Romans, where he says, therefore let's not judge one another anymore, but rather determine not to put an obstacle or a stumbling block in a brother's way. And that phrase of how we should not be a stumbling block to other people around us. Sometimes they might have to go through the hard thing that they're struggling through. And we just have to be there to support them through it, not somehow make it go away if we can, or deny that it's happening, but be there for your brother and sister as they're going through that thing, whatever the struggle it is. Just like Jesus was struggling with the idea of he has to go die on the cross. Everybody in here is struggling with something, and we have to be helpers and supporters and not stumbling blocks.
Everybody's dealing with something. A couple things. We have an expression that says, with friends like these, who needs enemies? That's kind of what this is, in a real example of what that was lived out looking like. As far as being an offense to anybody, we got to always, if we're putting our life aside for other people, we're Americans. You can't tell us what to do, right? We have a list of rights. We can do anything we want. I can talk how I want. I can live how I want. I can dress how I want. I can do anything I want. You can't stop me. That's the American attitude. We forget that we're Christians first. If I'm doing something that's offensive to somebody, I need to step back and say, listen, it's better for you to have your way than have mine. It's far more important for that.
Clay, before you jump,
Yes, sir.
very important comment. I love what Drew said. He explains why he was an offense to him. That's what the last verse. He says, "For you are not mindful of things of God, but things of men." Jesus was focused on kingdom things, God's stuff, and you're telling me about stuff of men, and those two are in conflict. Therefore, you became an offense to me, right? So he explained to him, so how can we become an offense to somebody? How can we cause a stumbling block to someone? Man, you don't gotta forgive them, blah, blah, blah. You just became an offense, right? So you are sowing discord. You're doing everything, and this is a very important thing, that when we don't give good godly advice, we're not mindful of things of God, but of things of men, we are an offense no matter how we think we're helping somebody. It really messes.
And it doesn't always mean just, that's something that offends you. It's something that, this is more serious, causing somebody to sin, and not fulfill God's will in this particular instance here. I want to focus on a couple things real quick in verses 24 to 27. We talk about taking up your cross and following after him. First of all, what does that mean to do these things, to deny self? What does that mean? Put your life off to the side.
No, what we want is what God wants.
Well, it should be right, absolutely. But taking your cross, what does that mean?
I think it means just what he said. Take up your cross. You know.
Follow to the, it means losing your life for my sake?
Yeah.
That's what that means, right? Yeah. And also, the book pointed out that it's a pick up at once. Like, it's not a slow action. It's something that's get it and go.
No.
It's a call to action. Follow him. What does that mean? That's pretty obvious. What does follow him mean?
Follow in his steps. 1 Peter 2:21 tells us that.
Yeah. Something I want to key in on here in these verses. These are all investment terms in verses 24 to 27. Talk about saving. Verse 25, save his life, will lose it. Lose life for my sake, will find it. Verse 26, what profit is it to a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? These are all investment terms. If you think about that from an investment perspective, I'm not an investment guy, but if you think about it from that perspective, it kind of takes on a different angle a little bit, I think. As far as the seriousness of making the right decisions here. Are you investing in the right things?
So don't you find it funny that, so the whole idea of Peter questioning Christ, the arrogance of it, number one, right? To me, when I read it, I went, do you not believe yet? Right? I don't get you. I don't understand you. I don't understand why you think you know better than Jesus. Right? Why you're not listening. I'm not sure he's coming in here for a discussion. He's telling you, right? But then that's why we go all the way through 24 through 27 or 26, right? And I think he's laying it out for him, right? He's going, I'm not sure if Peter doesn't do that, he doesn't have to do this, in a manner of speaking, because he's going, that Jesus said to the disciples, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take his cross and follow me. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul, right? Look, it's not you. You're putting yourself first instead of putting God first, and you have to lose all that, right? Going back to Peter and his arrogance, right? And he's going, this isn't going to happen to you, Lord, is it? I'm going to fix Jesus
I got
Christ.
to fix for it. I can handle it. I got it.
Yeah, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's like, I'm sitting there going, and these are the apostles. And I'm going, if I'm Jesus, just keeping it real, I'm so frustrated right now. Because I'm like, these are the ones who should know better than anybody else, and they're questioning me. Right?
He saw a glimpse of hope in Peter when Peter got it and had that confession earlier.
Right.
I think he saw that in Peter. He goes, okay, it's taking hold at least. Peter gets it. If Peter can get it, anybody can get it.
Yeah, but your life, you have to put your life down. Your life is secondary to leading a life following God, right? And you've got to understand that. And you've got to believe it. And you've got to have faith in it. But how many times on earth do we not do that, right? How many times when you're talking to somebody about the Bible or about Christianity, and they start with well, I think, right? And whenever I'm discussing the Bible with anybody, I go, the term we are not going to use in this discussion is I think, because no one cares what I think. Chapter verse.
I don't care what you think.
No one cares. No one cares what everybody thinks, right? Everybody wants to know what God thinks. They should. And if you're discussing the Bible with anybody and they go, I think, just stop listening. Right?
Change the tone of the conversation, at least.
Well, don't stop listening.
Yeah.
But you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's like, but that's what Peter did, I think.
Yeah, and Jesus is using this passage here in 24 to 27, talking to all the disciples to teach them, but also, Peter, you listen to this. This is about you as well. This is about me. This is about you. It's about all of us getting this all right. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was just gonna add that, the comment around how Jesus should be so frustrated with them that you talked to them and told them over and over again, and they still don't really understand. Just the incredible patience Jesus has and understanding of, and they're not gonna truly understand when we keep teaching them 20, 50, 100 times, I gotta tell them the same thing.
So how does this apply to us?
I gotta be patient with other people.
Yeah, but we're also disciples, right?
Yeah.
Well, he's telling them. He's telling us. It's directly applicable to us.
Very much so.
Right? It's a real hard thing to swallow in a lot of ways, but it's about us. We have to do the exact same thing. Take it from that exact same perspective. So he's talking to the disciples at that point, but it's a comment for us as well.
And remember, Jesus told them something important. Take up your cross. A man takes up his. Sometimes people believe they're taking up the cross, but they didn't pay attention to what Jesus said. He said, you take up your cross, right, and follow after me. We're doing show and tell. That's what Jesus was saying, right? I'm going to show you, I'm going to tell you, then you're going to go ahead and rinse and repeat. And the challenge is, we see Jesus who took up his cross, died for us, and he's saying, that was the whole point of John 13, right? Of him washing the disciples' feet. It wasn't about washing feet. It was about what? By this, everyone's going to know for the love that you have for one another. So when we come back, the frustration that Jesus has, I have a different perspective on this. I don't think Jesus is really tripping off of them like, how in the world could you not get it? Because he's coaching them through this moment, right? He keeps dropping nuggets to them. And what you see is their faith growing. Peter did not walk on water. Then all of a sudden the joker walks on water. Now it's a whole different thing. Well, who do people say I am? Well, who do you say? You're the Son of God. Okay. Then he takes it to the next iteration. Well, guess what? I'm the Son of God. I'm about to die. I'm going to be raised up in 3 days. What? No, man, I'm not about to let that happen. Guess what? Get behind me, Satan, because you keep focusing on things of men, not things of God. And then he says, so, if you want to focus on things of God, let me tell you what you got to do. And then he just walks them through what you just read. Jesus is coaching him straight through this so we can understand. So nobody can ever say, look what I did. Because all you did was follow the master.
Yeah. It's about creating more disciples and doing the exact same thing, following the exact same steps through and through. Good comment. Verse 28, he's talking about the foundation of the church. Or certainly I say to you, there are some standing here who shall not take death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. That's about the burden of the church. There in verse 28 at the end of chapter 16. We're going to shift gears now, going into chapter 17. Were there any other comments or questions on chapter 16 before we move on?
All right.
I think there's sort of the same goodness he had Peter for us to learn from.
Yeah, 100%.
I'm sure that was a divine selection there.
He picked Peter for a reason.
I think so.
It wasn't accidental. He didn't get Peter and have like buyer's remorse. I'm like, oh, this guy. He doesn't get it. Yes, ma'am.
I had some good advice not too long ago. And thinking about Peter and myself, to me, he was like, oh, no, they don't. No, they won't. No, they didn't. That's the whole thought process. And sometimes we do that because we're worried more about something else than we are about what we need to be doing. So to take up your cross is kind of the same mindset.
It's an individual thing.
Yeah, you do your thing. And whatever they're doing over there, that's them. But you do your thing.
Yep.
Well, I think he's also telling us there's a burden to it.
Yep.
Right? I mean, he
says that for sure.
Well, he's warning them, right? That this isn't going to be easy.
But here's a
And he's
burden.
telling everybody, right?
Yeah.
To be a Christian is not the easy way out. You're going to have to take up your burden. You're going to have to take up your cross and carry it, right? So, which is all. I actually like that much.
No, it's something hard. It's hard for us to wrap our brains around.
Yeah.
In our culture, we have to lose our lives for this. religious, like everybody's religious on some level around this country. It's hard for us to wrap our brains around losing our life for that, but we have Christians around the world that are facing that very thing. That's a real threat to a lot of people. It's hard for us to understand it, but again, putting your life aside will save it.
Yeah,
And that same Peter wrote First and Second Peter. He grew to the point when he wrote First and Second Peter.
Yep.
Right. And tradition had that he was crucified upside down.
Yep.
And so, Peter gets a bad rap, but I love Peter.
Yeah, Peter's us.
He is us.
I've got my notes for Peter. Peter's us. How is he us?
Absolutely.
He's us.
Yeah. So you have to look at our own lives and allow people an opportunity to grow, and that's what he was doing. You don't come out a perfect Christian. You don't come out, Yeah, but look at what he wrote. Go back and read First and Second Peter.
Yeah.
And then look at Peter.
Something Brent said a while ago. I'll get real quick. Something Peter said, Brent said a while ago about teaching is that teaching is not a one and done kind of a thing. It's not.
Right.
Here's information, nail it, get it done. It takes some time. It takes a process. It takes time.
Absolutely.
So he might have been a bit impetuous or quick to speak, but his heart was in the right place. Like he was determined.
Right.
He wanted to do the right thing. He was going to fight for Jesus, and all that was there. Did he mess up? Sure. Did he scream and curse and say he didn't know him? Yeah, he got scared, right? But again, look at what he did after and how he taught and
how you started,
what he was willing to do. Yeah.
When he realized he was wrong, he made the change.
Yeah.
And what you see from that is growth, right? And surely at this point, he's the one who said, hey, we have all things that pertain to life. And of course, he was led by the Holy Spirit. So I'm not saying Peter wrote that and he made it up, but we have all things that pertain to life and godliness, right? Hey, if you do this, there's an interest supply to you so wide, you can't miss heaven. Who better to tell that story than Peter, right? It's a beautiful thing.
Yep. Things like a camera. Peter used negatives to develop the camera joke, Kurt.
It's digital now.
Yeah.
But it's a different process. You still got the process.
Yeah. All right, getting into chapter 17, this is Jesus' Transfiguration. Someone want to read verses 1 through 7? No, read that for me, please.
And after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John his brother, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. And behold, there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. And Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good that we are here. If you wish, I will make 3 tents here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. And he was still speaking when, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them. And behold, from the cloud it said, This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell on their faces and were terrified. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, Rise and have no fear. And when they lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only.
All right, so it's a really interesting scenario here. He's got, who does he bring with him? He brings Peter, James, and John, his brothers. Same three he usually, I think it said it goes in the same brings the same 3 guys with him. A couple different instances, I forget where they all were, but it's okay. We'll get there. But he had the same 3 disciples with him. The book says the most obvious location for this event was on Mount Hermon. Nothing definite, and that's not really important, but Mount Hermon. I know a few of you took the trip to Holy Land last year, or 2 years ago. You may have seen that.
It's interesting because on that side they actually have a building, and in that building there are altars for all 3 of those people. And
we're all people, right?
It was just crazy because in the group that we walked up to tour it, I mean everybody just said, okay, they ended up doing exactly what they weren't supposed to do. But it was, I can't remember if it was 5th or 6th century it was built, but it was crazy. It was, but yeah, they've got that on the site now.
He clearly said.
You don't have the same book we got, right?
No, it was just, we were all walked up in disbelief.
Well, there you go. Yeah, Mount Hermon's got this lovely display that apparently is way wrong. So it's a scenario here where Jesus is on top of this mountain, and who's he with? He's with Moses and Elijah. Why are those 2 important? What are they there for?
two most important people back have to do with the law.
Was Jesus here to fulfill the law?
Yeah.
And Moses here for the law. Elijah's there to represent the prophets, right?
Right, yeah.
Pretty simple explanation for why they're there. And then here comes good old Peter. Verse 4, Peter shows up again and does
Heart's in the right place.
Heart's in the right spot. We say bless his heart, because that's what you say, something like this. Man, Peter, bless his heart. What does Peter do? In all his full Peterness, what does he do?
He says,
I got a great
we're
idea.
here, we can make 3 tents here for all of you and basically, commemorate this and worship you all.
Now remember, they're under the law, and at this point, Peter has no idea the law is gonna come to an end.
Yeah.
So this is why this is an interesting comment though, right? Because in Peter's defense, the law is the law, they're all living under the law, they're all living under the prophets, Jesus is keeping it perfectly. There's been no mention that the law is gonna end, that I can recall at this point, right? So him making this statement, is it really that crazy, or did God allow that statement to be made to make it written down so that it's another point to drive the point that guess what? There's a transformation happening. That's getting ready to happen.
He's recognizing that Jesus belongs with these.
Right.
From their perspective, right? They were everything when it comes to their spiritual nature to this point. And he's recognizing Jesus belongs.
Yeah, come here.
Well, it goes back to what Brent said earlier, hence, when Christ was explaining to them, I'm going to be killed and raised up on the 3rd day, hence, that's why he chastises Peter, get behind me, so forth. Now it's coming together with some of this here, but still Peter doesn't understand when he's built tabernacle.
Yeah, Peter doesn't quite grasp it.
And there's another little divine thing going on here, because were there pictures of Moses and Elijah?
Right.
Well, this tells us a little bit about, this tells us some additional information we don't want to talk about, but
How did they know?
there's more beyond life.
But how did they know they were Moses?
He didn't even say, hey, Moses, hey, Elijah. He goes, I got a great idea. Since you're all 3 here, let's do this. Didn't even bat an eye at that. He went right
That's her question, we don't know, but he did.
Yeah.
For some reason, he knew who they were.
It's interesting, Jesus has this 3 that he goes with, and group that he uses a couple of times. So there's a point to that. Everybody cannot be as close to everybody. We're supposed to love each other, but some relationships are just going to be deeper in the church, right? Jesus had this group that things happen, and it's interesting because they got to see something that the others did not get to see or experience. They're going to hear about it, but that's just a crazy thing when you think about it.
No, they're all, not, I won't say all the important things, a lot of milestones, they show up with the same 3 guys, yeah. So Peter comes in and says, I got a great idea, let's make these, let's build some tents. And what happens there in verse 5? The voice cuts him off while he's talking. While he was still speaking, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and suddenly a voice came out of the cloud saying, this is my beloved son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear him. That is critically important. I want to go back and look at something else here.
I can't imagine what that voice sounded like.
Kind of like yours, a little deeper.
Exactly.
Had a radio voice, probably.
It was overwhelming. It put fear in them.
That was high pitched. It was a nice bellowing. It's something that got their attention, right? I'll get right back to comment. I want to go back and look at something. Turn over to Mark chapter 9, verse 3, real quick. I want to read Mark chapter 9, verse 3.
And his clothes became radiant and fine white, and no one on earth could bleach them.
Yeah, here's how the New King James Version reads this. His clothes came shining exceedingly white, like snow, such as no launderer on earth can whiten them. There's a different way of looking at it. Turn over to Revelations chapter 1 real quick. Another verse I wanted to read out of there. Revelations 1. Revelation. Oh, my Bible's like, it needs some work. So.
Yeah.
it's another description about Jesus. So what happens on the Mount Transfiguration, talk to what John discusses in Revelation, verse 13, chapter 1. And in the midst of the seven lampstands, one like the Son of Man, clothed with a garment down to the feet, and girded about the chest with a golden band. His head and hair were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes like a flame of fire. His feet were like fine brass, as is refined in a furnace, and his voice as the sound of many waters. He had in his right hand 7 stars, out of his mouth went a sharp two-edged sword, and his countenance was like the sun shining in its strength. This is another description of what Jesus at that point. But he gets the situation here on the Mount Transfiguration, on Mount Hermon, and it's kind of Jesus. Why is he going? Why is he glowing? Like, what does that mean? It's kind of like the shell underneath, I guess you want to call it that. This is what Jesus truly was. He was showing everybody his true, what's the word is, holiness. Spiritual nature is probably a better word for it. Sometimes I go with the whole putting together with the words thing, but it shows Jesus' true, who he truly was, being a spiritual being. And it kind of makes you think that's what he looked like before he came down to earth to be a human, put on this ragged body, and he had to show it that way. Another perspective on it, but something that'd be hard to sit and take all that in if you're there witnessing all this. But there in verse 5, I lost my notes. Verse 5, God comes in, cuts him off, and what does he say about Jesus? Why is it important? He brings this up. If he's there with Moses and Elijah, this is God telling him that he says, "This is my son." Also, the relationship to God was higher than Moses and Elijah had. His faithfulness, he's well pleased in him, and his authority, he tells him to hear him. So it's God's way of saying, yeah, Moses and Elijah were critical, they were important. Jesus is far more important than them. He's up and above both of these guys.
It's the same wording as when Jesus was baptized.
Yeah, exactly. It's the exact same thing. It also happens in verse
Matthew 3:17.
Yeah, Matthew 3:17, absolutely. Exact same wording. All along, there's been points to Jesus saying, or been points at Jesus saying he's going to be fulfilling the old law. He's listening to him, hear him, obey him. Peter sees some of that. Peter experiences a lot of this himself, doesn't get it. How does that apply to us? Same thing, right? So there in verse 6, it says, "And the disciples heard it, and they fell on their faces and were greatly afraid. And Jesus came down and touched them and said, Arise, and do not be afraid. When they lifted up their heads, lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only." Is there any significance to that, you think? You have to venture a guess. Why is that significant? Or why is that significant to us?
Well, so keep in mind, right? Hey, I'm going to die. No, you're not. Pick up your cross, follow you. You think wrong. Pick up your cross, follow after me. By the way, let's go up on this mountain. You're on top of the mountain, all of a sudden, whoo, there's this glowing Jesus, and they're like, what in the world? And then you hear the voice come down, they fall down. Remember, because the statement is getting ready to happen, that next verse is important. Because remember, they couldn't understand that he was going to raise on the third day. They're not going to question it in a second, because they just saw something so amazing that I said he was the Christ, now I see this, and I hear this voice, wow. And so when he says that, it's like a gloss over now. When he says, no more questioning about, you're going to rise on the third day, they asked a different question altogether. About, hey, but we thought Elijah had to come first. So it's a sequence of teachings that Jesus, he says something, then he confirms it. He says something, then he confirms it, and this is what you're seeing go through this path.
Yeah, to your point, when they looked up, no one left with Jesus.
Yeah, their natural human reaction, they were afraid.
Yeah.
In that situation, I think any of us would all be the same.
Anytime we see or hear God speaking, burning bush, things like that, this is the reaction. It's immediate. Avert your eyes. Don't, respect, that sort of thing. But like you said, when they look up, Jesus is there. That's where they need to focus.
Something to consider. no relationship with Christ at all, no relationship with God, and they start reading this, and they have a little bit of fear, like, oh my goodness, I'm so far off base. It's a humbling experience for a lot of people that when they finally understand who Christ is, have that kind of fear sometimes, and realize that change needs to happen. Something to be said, I think, there. So this experience happens, and they come down off the mountain. They're in verse 9, and he told them, tell the vision to no one until the Son of Man is risen from the dead. Keep this quiet until I am resurrected, which is gonna be a hard secret to keep, I would imagine. But he told them to keep that again. Doesn't want this out, wants it hidden. If he wanted it to happen from a lot of people, he would have done it, but it happened in a very isolated instance, isolated people. So he said, keep this hidden. Don't tell anybody until the resurrection. On the way down, the disciples asked him, saying, why then do the scribes say that Elijah must come first? Just listen to this. Why did the scribes say that Elijah must come first? In verse 11, Jesus answered and said to them, indeed, Elijah is coming first and will restore all things. But I say to you that Elijah has come already, and they did not know him, but did to him whatever they wished. Likewise, the Son of Man is also about to suffer at their hands. And the disciples understood that he spoke to them of John the Baptist. That's a kind of a twisty kind of thing to even read through. What does it mean?
They have Jonah.
They have Jonah.
Right? It's the same conversation. They have Jonah. Hey, Luke 16. Send this man, send Lazarus back so that he can tell my brothers so they don't come to this place, my father. They are Moses and the prophet. The message was always there. You didn't listen to the message, which goes back to what Jesus taught at the beginning. Seeing you do not see, hearing you do not hear. So Elijah did come, for the message came that John the Baptist was here preparing the way.
Yeah, and the book actually points this out, that there's actually a teaching at the time. They're teaching that Elijah was actually coming back again. That was the teaching that they believed. So you talk about false teaching getting into the disciples. How's that apply to that? It's pretty obvious. False teaching can get out there. It sounded good. But he witnesses all this, and he asked, why do they say Elijah's coming again? It's a whole conversation wrapped up in that. That was a teaching that was prevalent at the time. Whether they had that teaching or not, who knows? But they at least heard of that, and we're asking about it. So yeah, any questions about that? At the end of talking about John the Baptist, they understood that.
It goes back to 16:14 when Jesus asked Peter, who do people say that I am? And his response was, some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, some say Jeremiah or one of the prophets.
Yep. There's a lot of mixed signals going on about who Jesus actually was, and they're there with him. So some people say you're all this, but I know you to be Jesus Christ, the living God. Again, Peter got it at that point. Absolutely. All right, then beginning in verse 14, I want to read that passage 14 to 21 real quick.
And they came to the crowd. A man came up to Jesus, falling on his knees before him, and saying, Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is a lunatic and is very ill. For he often falls into the fire and often into the water. And I brought him to your disciples, and they could not cure him. And Jesus answered and said to him, You unbelieving and perverted generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring him here to me. And Jesus rebuked him, and the demon came out of him, and the boy was cured at once. Then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, Why could we not drive it out? And he said to them, Because of the littleness of your faith. For truly I say to you, if you have the faith the size of a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, Move from here to there, and it will move. And nothing will be impossible to you. But this kind does not go out except by prayer and fasting.
I think it's interesting, your translation calls it a lunatic.
Yeah.
What do you have?
Epileptic.
Seizures.
Yeah,
New
Huh?
New American Standard.
Okay. It's very
But it
interesting.
almost makes it sound like the man wasn't sure his son had a demon. It almost makes it sound like he didn't know if he was just sick with something or.
I think the dad understood the kid who had a problem, and the only person that could fix it was going to be the disciples.
Yeah.
They threw them under the bus, and they couldn't fix it. I brought them to the disciples, hoping that they would. I think the guy had genuine faith that these guys should fix this. They had the power. He believed more than they did. They couldn't pull it off. So he throws them under the bus and says they couldn't figure it out. And then they're like, it's a teaching point. I think to Drew's point earlier, this is where Jesus starts getting frustrated. his frustration kind of comes out on him. He says, "O faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? Bring him here to me." You kind of say it's a very curt kind of a statement. Bring him here to me, because he was getting frustrated with him. He heals him, rebukes the demon. The disciples ask, "Why couldn't we do this?" And he said, "Because of your unbelief." So even if you had just a little bit of faith, even a little bit, could have got the job done. They didn't have that. Again, a very solid thing for us. He said, but this demon is kind of only be cast out through prayer and fasting. Very devoted type of way to get the demon out. Verse 21-23, or 22-23, Jesus again predicts his death and his resurrection. It says the Son of Man is about to be betrayed into the hands of men, and they will kill him. The third day he will rise up, and they were all exceedingly sorrowful. They hear it again. He's not predicted this a couple times. They hear it again. They're like it says they're sorrowful. They're kind of just despair. What the best way to describe that? The verse 24 through 27. They came to Capernaum. Those who received the temple tax came to Peter and said, "Does your teacher not pay the temple tax?" And he said, "Yes." And when he had come into the house, Jesus anticipated him, saying, "What do you think, Simon? From what do the kings of the earth take the customs or taxes, from their sons or from strangers?" Peter said to him, "From strangers." Jesus said to him, "Then the sons are free. Nevertheless, lest we offend them, go to the sea, cast in a hook, and take the fish that comes up first. And when you have opened its mouth, you'll find a piece of money. Take that and give it to them for me and you." Okay, why is this story significant to us?
Pay your taxes.
Even Jesus paid his taxes.
Part of it, yeah. Even Jesus.
So he's still perfectly in compliance.
He's in compliance.
This just tells me I need to go fishing more.
Well,
Maybe I could pay my taxes.
Spend that money, man. Let me know. He tells him to go do this kind of a random act, but the point of having him go find this fish was to prove that it's something that only Jesus could do. He predicted it. He told him where to go, how to do it, what's going to happen when you find it. Only Jesus can pull it out. So we made it through chapter 17. Do 18 on Wednesday.
Wednesday, I'm going to go back to first and cover that again.
I'm Greg, representation of
the temple operating? You tripping on it?